All I knew is that this is awesome what we're doing. Screw AOL, screw the man. I have nothing else to do. I'm going to spend 10 hours a day doing this because I love it. I didn't feel bad making this program and just kind of basically going to war. I had just an intense hatred for AOL, for TOS Advisor, for the administrators, for Steve Case. They're going to have to face the facts that AOL is a dirty machine, and there's just scumbags on here, and I'm just a kid fighting back against the man.
Welcome to AOL. You've got post.
Welcome. You've got mail.
Please state your handle and the years you were active on AOL.
My handle was DeChronic, and I was active on AOL as a hacker between 1994 and late 1995.
Awesome. And when did you first start using computers?
My first experience with computers was with my sister's. She had a Tandy TRS-80 computer back in the early 80s, probably like 83 or 84. And, she was really into computers back then. And that was my first experience. She's 7 years older than I am. So, she had a leg up on that. And that's how I got started with that.
And when did you first get on the internet?
Like most people, AOL, that was my first experience with the internet itself. Back then, we didn't call it the internet. It was AOL, and then the internet was kind of burgeoning in another place that didn't want anything to do with AOL. So we got started on the internet through, so we ended up buying this computer. Well, we didn't really buy it. We rented it from Rent-A-Center because we were kind of poor and couldn't afford a computer. So my sister was able to rent one from Rent-A-Center for like $50 a week. And it was a very low-end computer. It had like 1 megabyte of RAM, didn't have a modem on it, didn't even have Windows. And so there was a whole ordeal in trying to even upgrade that computer to get it to be able to run AOL in the first place. Eventually we did, through all kinds of schemes, we're able to upgrade the computer, and then we got the AOL disk like most people, and we got online.
So what were your impressions of AOL when you first got on it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that was the first experience of the internet. So like most people, you're just amazed, it's like, wow, you can talk to people. They're not there with you. I mean, so I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a late Gen Xer. So I grew up in the 80s. We didn't have mobile phones, didn't have any of this technology that we have today. So, you're jumping on the internet for the first time. I'm like 16 years old. And it was just an amazing experience, and pretty soon I found the hacker rooms. I think the first hacker-related stuff I saw on AOL was basically a public room. They'd have public rooms called Tricks, AOL Tricks. Basically, you would go in there, and people would talk about like things you could do on AOL that you weren't really supposed to do, but they were kind of cool. The first thing I remember, like the first trick that I remember was, I think it was just called IM interception or IM stealing. And basically, you could basically steal all the IMs that were being sent on AOL at that one time by sending this 8-bit character through an IM that their coding couldn't handle. So, yeah, so I got into that. I got interested in the tricks and that kind of thing, and it all kind of snowballed from there.
That's really cool. So you learned about the tricks that folks could do through IMs. And what else did you see going on at AOL at that time? Like, was there anything concerning you with, like, I guess because once you get enough people in anything, right, there's going to be people that are going to do things that others aren't going to like, right?
Sure. There was an aspect of AOL that I didn't like. Of course, I was a teenager. I gravitated towards the teenage rooms and the hacker rooms, the tricks rooms back then, as they were called. And those were predominantly populated by younger people. I think there were a couple of maybe 20-year-olds or 25-year-olds in there, but I mean, they were almost always teenagers in those rooms. But there was another side of AOL that I didn't like, particularly the authority and the way that they would shut down the tricks room and the hacker room. And of course, as most people know who've read the AOL help file or the text file, the README file, they know that I wrote in there about how there was a double standard among the treatment that the hackers would receive versus some of the other people in AOL who would be doing bad things, but they would be left alone. So basically, I had a mixed feeling about AOL. I hated or disliked the authority structure on it. Corporations in general, I had a bad feeling about, but I liked the teenagers. I liked the hackers side of it and that kind of community.
Yeah, definitely. So When did you get into programming?
So on my sister's TRS-80, back in those days, there wasn't any media that you could store programs on back then. They had tape recorders. You could basically record code on the tape through digital audio, right? So through digital audio, you could record programs that you would write, or you could purchase software that way. But we didn't own one of those because that cost like another $200, and the computer was expensive enough. So we just had the basic computer. And basically, you had to write your programs every time you turned it on. So as soon as you turned on the TRS-80, if you wanted to do anything on it, you had to sit there and write 200 lines of code, or however simple it was, 10 lines of code or whatever. Of course, if it was anything sophisticated, you're going to sit there and spend probably an hour writing your code. I was too young to really understand a whole lot of it, what was going on in there. And the TRS-80s came with books, with software written on the pages. So it would have the basic code listed on the pages. And so we would just basically just follow that code, and we would write our programs every time we wanted to run a program on it. And so that was my first experience with programming. Eventually, we did get a tape recorder, and we were able to store stuff and write custom things. And then there was a large gap between then and then when I got an AOL and actually started writing code.
So can you talk a little bit about that? From what I can tell, you're using Visual Basic.
Yeah, we're using Visual Basic. So in the rooms, there's kind of transition period between the tricks rooms that we had, let's say in early 94, and then what became like this vast community that we know now, or, that came about years later. And back when we started, there really wasn't any coding. There weren't any programs. To perform tricks or to perform scrolling is really what most kids were interested in. If you wanted to scroll a macro, you wanted to scroll artwork in the chat room, you would use a macro program. And the most used one was called Ghost Tools. And Ghost Tools was just this little tiny program on Windows 3.1. And you would load it up and it had a little box for you to save your macros and record your macros. So you just record, your scrolling on that. So, we could automate a couple of the tricks that we did using that, but it wasn't too sophisticated. And then I had this friend, Rizzer. He made a macro program in Visual Basic, and he showed it to me. And what it did was it performed text manipulation. So back then on AOL 1.1, you were able to use another person's name in the chat room if you knew how to format the text correctly. So it was a trick that we always did. And, we'd use macro programs for it. And he wrote a Visual Basic program that basically, did that for you. All you had to do is type in the person's name that you wanted to manip and what you wanted them to say, and he clicked a button. And so I don't think he released it or anything. He just gave it out to a couple of friends, and he showed that to me. And I thought, whoa, this is awesome. Like, how did you make this? And he goes, something called Visual Basic, and at that time, the where scene on AOL was just at the very beginning. There really wasn't a whole lot of where's going on then, but one of the uploads that was being passed around was Visual Basic, and that's how he got a hold of it. And that's how I found it. So I found the mail that was being passed around in the Wares community, a Visual Basic, so I downloaded the pirated version. And I said, okay, this is a game changer. This is going to be awesome. We're going to create a program. It's going to have all the tricks. It's going to have all the things we do. And I thought, okay, well, what can we call it? Back then, the people that hated AOL on the internet had a nickname for it. They'd call it AOHell. It was kind of like a derogatory name. So I said, oh, that's a perfect name for it. We'll just call it AOHell. And, that's kind of like how all that started.
Okay, so the first versions of it, was it just like you and Rizzer and a few people passing it around?
Yeah, so it was me, Rizzer, and then there was two other guys. One guy called the Squirrel, and there was another guy called Dark Wizard. And Dark Wizard never wrote any code for us, but I sent him the code base for it. He kind of redid the interface for it, and then took off all our names and left his name on there, and then released a program under his name with this new interface and all our code.
Wow.
And then I never heard of it again, and that was that guy. The Squirrel and the Wizard, they wrote a couple of features for it. At that time, I was not in high school, and I could devote my whole day to that. So I would spend 8-10 hours a day just pumping out features for this thing. And so the first versions, yeah, it just had a couple of features. I think the Squirrel, he wrote the drive hell feature for it, which was, I don't know if you remember, I think AOL may have already changed by that point when you got on AOL. But one of the early tricks we could do is something called drive hell, or we named it drive hell. But basically what you would do is you'd format A:, B: into the chat room. And if you did it in the right way, it caused your A and B drives on your computer to start accessing. And if you did it really fast, basically it would cause everybody's computer in the chat room to just go haywire and just switch from A drive, B drive, and you'd hear the drives kick in. So, of course, we had floppy drives back then. And the reason why AOL implemented the feature that was exploited was because there was you had a feature where you could play wave files. You could play wave sounds. Like if you remember, I don't know if you remember that, but you could play so you'd do like a squiggly symbol S and then the name of the wave file, and then it would play the wave file. But the way that it was done, you could actually put in the drive letter of that wave file, and it would access whatever drive you told it to. So basically, all you had to do is put this in the chat room, and it would start accessing people's drives. So Squirrel wrote a feature for that. That was just one of the many tricks we did. And Rizzer, he added macros to it. And that was the very primitive version of AOHell 1.0.
Was that like all in send keys or?
Yeah, exactly. That was all send keys. So it was basically a glorified macro program at that time. And to me, though, that was one of the coolest things that we could do, you know.
Interesting.
So we did that for like a month. So that was, we wrote that in November of 94. And like I said, it really wasn't much. And then something happened to the squirrel. I don't know what happened to him because people lose touch and all that stuff. Rizzer was still around. And I'm like, okay, let's do AOL 2. We've got to go crazy with this. So my motivation behind it was I wanted to do something cool. I wanted to get back at AOL. So there was like a revenge factor, like I wrote in the README file. And, I didn't have a life outside of computers. And so this was my life. Like the community was my life. Programming started to become my life as I learned how to program. And really, I wanted to grow the community. My vision was to create something really cool that would bring a lot of people in. I can't say that I foresaw what would happen later. Like this huge community would end up coming out of it. I didn't foresee that. But all I knew is that this is awesome what we're doing. Screw AOL, screw the man. I have nothing else to do. I'm going to spend 10 hours a day doing this because I love it. The thing about it is that I became addicted to like coming up with like these new features that just pulling them out of a hat. Like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to do this? Wouldn't it be cool to do that? So in version 2, that's where I created the phishing component.
Well, so with the phishing component, like at that time, were people just manually phishing or were people phishing at all?
I would say for certain that there wasn't a whole lot of phishing going on. By that point that I added that feature to the program, I had already been phishing manually for about a year with my friend. As I explained in my paper, there's a guy called Soul Crusher, and he showed me basically the tricks that he was using to get access to AOL for free. By stealing people's accounts, basically conning them out of it. So yeah, we had been doing that, but there weren't too many people phishing by the time we got to, by the time I put that feature in AOL, that was something that really exploded after I added that.
That feature is the automated phishing, right?
Yeah, basically, it automated what we were doing manually. So that's right.
So I guess for our listeners, briefly explain what phishing is.
Yeah, well, phishing at its core is basically fraud, if you want to get down to the most basic definition. I mean, we all kind of understand what that is, what it means to trick somebody or to con somebody. I don't think there's anybody alive who hasn't had some kind of experience like that. And even children, understand that concept. But when you move it over to computers, basically what it means is you're spamming multiple people, basically information that's not true in order to deceive them and receive something from them. So in our case, we would message people on AOL and try to deceive them into thinking that we were administrators and that we needed their password or we needed their credit card information. And we were hoping that they didn't know any better and they would believe our story that we were these good guys who, just lost your information temporarily. And we just, in order to keep your account, we need to, double check everything. And surprisingly, back then, a lot of people fell for it. And that's kind of what it is and kind of what we did. Back then, my mentality was, as I'm 16, 17 years old, and I grew up poor, and I was barely able to stay on AOL. Like we'd use those 10 free hour disks. I think the first account that I made on there, I had a small checking account with like $50 in it, and I blew that $50 like in the first couple of days being on AOL. And so my main goal at that point was, how do I stay on this really cool thing, right, that I found, like, because I can't afford it. And so that's where I kept trying to find AOL discs. Back then, you had to buy a modem or buy a new video card, and you'd get a free AOL disc with it that came with 10 free hours. And so, I would use that to get the discs. And when my friend showed me that about phishing and taking people's, accounts, my mentality back then was, if you have a credit card, you're rich. So if you're on AOL and you're actually able to afford this place, you're rich. And therefore, I don't care, if I use your account and I charge up your credit card. That was basically my mentality of it. And the same went with everything else. So yeah, that was kind of the morality behind it. I didn't really think about the consequences very much as far as for other people. For myself, I did a pretty decent job of trying to keep my anonymity and keeping myself protected and that kind of thing. But in my eyes, if you were on AOL, you're either some kind of sexual deviant, you were rich because you had a credit card and you could afford it anyway. So I didn't care if I basically screwed you over, and half the people on AOL are scumbags. It was my opinion. So I didn't feel bad making this program, automating this stuff, and just kind of basically going to war in a certain sense against AOL and the people on there that I didn't like. So in a nutshell, that was kind of like, my mentality. As time went on, I wouldn't say matured, because at the core, I'm the same person. It's just I don't look at it like that. I'm still anti-authoritarian in the sense, I'm still kind of anti-capitalism in a sense, but I don't think that phishing is a good thing, right? Like in the general sense, it's not. I mean, when I think about the fact that a grandmother who doesn't have a lot of money gets phished, and now she can't afford to feed herself or buy Christmas gifts for her grandkid or something like that. I mean, real people were affected by that. And I didn't think about that, or I didn't allow myself to think about that at the time, which is why I did what was basically kind of like a psychopathic thing in creating that program in some sense, in some perspective.
Right. So, like, I mean, the program, it made it very easy, right, to fish whole chat rooms, and obviously a number of other things. It is interesting to look back at it now, especially like, with like your parents or something get phished, and you're just like, why would you click that link?
Yeah.
And it's tough. It's tough to see those kind of things. But back then it was like, well, we're just, getting all the passwords from the pedos, and like, who cares, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it is kind of interesting that way. So the second version was we're on AOL. You said 2, or what version was that?
Yeah, so in AOL version 2, I put in a bunch of new features, phishing. Rizzer, he added a couple of features. He was pretty much busy with school, and I guess he was going to go to college and all those kinds of things, and I didn't really have anything else to do. So I wrote the majority of the code and the interface and documentation and things. But Rizzer really contributed a lot in the credit card generation algorithm that he wrote, that we used for Credit Wizard, and that I used later for the fake account creator, which would create fake accounts. So back then, if you wanted a free AOL account, we would use something called Seamaster, which was basically a credit card number generator, and it was for DOS, if you can believe that. There was no Windows credit card generator back then. So we would just load up Seamaster, it would print out a credit card number, and then we'd make up some phone number or make up an address, make up a name, and then we'd have a free account for 10 hours or before, by the time AOL would shut it down. And back then, AOL didn't verify any credit card information. All AOL did was verify that the checksum on the credit card number was valid. And that's how they determined whether they're going to let you online or not. And so back then, we didn't know the difference, what that even meant. We just knew we needed a valid credit card number, and Seamaster was spitting these things out. And so Rizzer, he found the algorithm, so there was a news group called Alt 2600 for the 2600 hacker group. And then one of the postings on there would kind of like explain what the, what is it called? The LUN algorithm, or the mod 10 algorithm, which is the checksum algorithm. And they just explained in detail, you add 3 here, add 2 here, and if this has to be an even number, and then you subtract this, whatever it is, and then you have the checksum. So Rizzer got that post, and in the code, he pasted that post of Alt 2600, and he used that to write Visual Basic code to basically do the checksum and generate numbers. So you still needed prefixes for the credit cards. Like, banks would have their own 4-digit prefix for that. So he took Seamaster's list of credit cards. Seamaster included like a list of 100 banks. He took that and added that, and then he created the little code generator, credit card number generator. I thought, okay, that's awesome. We're going to add an info generator to this, and we're going to be able to extrapolate and have this fucking awesome interface. We're going to document it, have an installation program. I mean, this is going to be a full-fledged, program that people are going to use. It's going to be better than CMaster. It's going to be for Windows, and it's going to be easy to use. So RZR writing that algorithm was really, really important to that side of things. Whereas the other features that I wrote, like phishing and the majority of the program really was mostly macro based. I really didn't have the understanding of code to really even write something like an algorithm. RZR was very much kind of like a technical kind of algorithm kind of guy. He was very interested in doing code and learning what code is and how to code correctly and write that kind of technical stuff. Whereas I didn't give a shit what the code looked like, what the code was doing. I just wanted to build features and I wanted it to work for the end user. So that changed a little bit though. So when I got into AOHell 3, I got a lot more technical. I rewrote the whole program and basically added a shit ton more features in the API. So I got rid of send keys and completely used Windows API to do it all.
So that transitioning from send keys to Windows API, what did that look like? Were you collaborating with other people, or how did you pick up Windows API?
So from what I remember, there were no other programs were doing it. I realized that to do other things that I wanted to do, I was going to need to up my game a little bit. I was going to have to understand what was going on here with Windows. Specifically, I wanted to be able to read the AOL forms programmatically so that I could interact with them programmatically. So for instance, I wanted to be able to read the chat room, what the text was in the chat room, right? So I wanted to be able to read the text in the code and then be able to react programmatically based on what was happening in that code. So, in order to create the AI bot, you have to write the Visual Basic code in order to intercept the Windows messages that are going on in that window. And then you're able to retrieve the text. Then you can parse the text and interact with it however you want to. And then I don't know how experienced you are in the Windows code as far as like Visual Basic back then and how you had to get the window handles and send the text and all that. You remember that?
Yeah, I definitely remember that. You would have to kind of hop from handle to handle, the window to window to get where you need to go.
Yeah, that's right. And that's a funny thing you said, because one of the features that I created for the third version, I accidentally found that so there was an enumeration code where you could find all the window handles all at once. And by accident, I enumerated all AOL windows and sent them a message called WM_show. So it was like a show message commanding all windows to show themselves. And suddenly all these hidden things that you don't normally see on the AOL interface showed up because I accidentally enumerated all of them and forced them to show themselves. And so the little icons that AOL didn't intend to use started showing up on the toolbar, like these little weird things you'd never see before. I'm like, whoa, what is that? I'm like, okay, well, how can this be useful? I'm like, well, there's nothing really useful about those icons. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. Like, what if, like, when you go into a free area, what it's doing is it's just hiding all the windows. And then, when you come out of the free area, it unhides them all. So back then, I don't know if you remember, like they had a free area on AOL. You could check your bills. You could do whatever that you could do in the free areas. And it would actually hide your chat room. It would hide your whatever else you were doing on AOL. And then when you were done exiting the free area, all of a sudden those things would reappear in the exact same state that they were in before. So it wasn't actually closing that work that you were using. It was just temporarily, hiding it from you while you were in the free area. So I'm like, I bet you they're just hiding those windows programmatically, just sending a hide message. So with this enumeration thing where you enumerate all windows and force it to show themselves, I thought, let's see what happens when you go into a free area after having all these other windows open and see if they'll come back after, doing this procedure. And sure enough, they did. So I'd load up a bunch of windows, like I go into news groups and this and that, FTP sites, and then go into a free area. Sure enough, all those windows would go away. And then I'm like, okay, so then I hit the enumeration procedure, and then boom, everything would show up. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, I bet you, okay, so now the question was, is AOL still charging you? Does it still think you're in a free area while you're using this pay windows stuff? And it turned out, yeah, basically it still thought you were in a free area. They were just using this minor technique to hide it from you. And so that was how I did that feature.
That's really interesting. Can you tell me about the artwork at the beginning of AOL 3.0? Like, who created that?
Yeah. So actually, I think I included that in version 2. And so this was becoming like something that was taking on its own life. And I really wanted it to be professional, and I wanted it to have an intro screen. Back then we had songs that would sound, I included Metallica and Ozzy that would play song clips of all kinds of stuff. Of course, everyone knows the Dr. Dre song that plays, Chronic song that plays when you first start AOHell. But back in the earlier versions, there were all kinds of sounds that would play, like heavy metal and all kinds of stuff. But the intro screen in particular, I went into one of the art rooms on AOL, and I was talking to one of the guys who hung out there, and I said, I'm making this program. I need some artwork for it. He's like, okay, yeah, I can do it for you. And I'm like, okay. So I told him what I want. I'm like, okay, I want it to be like hell. I want there to be like demons or Satan. I want it to be fire, and I want Steve Case to be like burning in hell. And I'm like, can you do that? And he's like, yeah, I'll give it a shot. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll meet you back or whatever. So I literally met him like the next day in the chat room. I met back with him, and he had it, and he had this for me. And I looked at it, and I'm like, wow, that's perfect. I mean, like, wow, that's great. And he goes, well, I'm not too happy with it because like the little thing on the side is not perfectly symmetrical and this and that. I'm like, dude, you have no idea that this is absolutely perfect. Thank you very much. So that guy, I never saw him again. He sent me that. I put him in the credits for AOL, and Bitsmaster. Bitsmaster was his name. That was his screen name on AOL. Never met him again. And I don't know to this day if he ever knows what impact that had or how that was a part of anything, because it was just one guy I met one day. He sent me the file, and that was it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that image is it's phenomenal. I mean, just in terms of and then he cranked it out like in a day. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that guy knew what he was doing, and I don't think Steve Case liked that very much. I don't think he liked that very much.
It's funny, like everybody talked about how much they hated Steve Case back then. It was really funny.
Yeah, I mean, I had just an intense hatred for AOL, for TOS Advisor, for the administrators, for Steve Case. I mean, it was almost an irrational hatred, but I was a kid.
We both hated it and loved it at the same time.
Yes, that's exactly right. I love the community, the hackers, the Where scene, and all that stuff. I love the kids on there. All the programs that were made, after AOHell, like there was a little bit of a competition period where I was still making AOHell and other programs were coming out, and other people were trying to outdo me and I was trying to outdo them and stuff. That lasted for a few months, and there was good things and bad things about that. But all the stuff that came out later. See, I left AOL in September of '95, and that's when I wrote the last beta version of AOL 3. So it was AOL 3 Beta 5, and things were already going nuts by that point. Really, in the buildup of that whole year, from that January of '95 to September of '95. I mean, it was just so it was the kind of the explosion of the internet as well. So it kind of happened simultaneously. AOL was just growing like huge, and then it just so happened to be in the right place at the right time. It was passing around this hacker program that brought in all these teenagers from the teen chat rooms to become hackers and programmers. People were just belting out new programs. By the time I left, man, it was I couldn't keep track of them all. I mean, I would just go into a hack room, and I would just look to see the mass mailings that people were sending out that day, and I would see like 10 new programs that I'd never heard of before. I remember downloading one just because I couldn't keep up, and I wasn't trying to keep up. I just downloaded one. I remember randomly. This thing was called Burnout by Blue Felix, and nobody ever remembers it. People didn't even know it at that time. But I downloaded this thing, and it was amazing. I mean, the guy, his interface was just phenomenal. His coding skills were great. I mean, I just remember being blown away. I'm like, wow. I mean, nobody even heard of this. I just downloaded this randomly, and here is all this work this one guy put into this program. And, I was just humbled and amazed by that. I remember I was interviewed by an e-zine like the next year, and I mentioned it to the guy who was interviewing me. And I'm like, there's this program with Brown, and he had never heard of it. There's so much that came out of that. There really is just so much. And I'm sure you could talk about your experience and things that you wrote and stuff that, you could talk about it for hours. I mean, there's just really so much that came from that stuff,
Yeah, definitely. I think I learned the most by decompiling other people's programs and just looking at like, I think they're called modules. They're not even called functions, like their modules and stuff. And because like my code was crap back then. Like I think I named my variables like Bob because
Mhm.
like I just was like, oh, I can just name them whatever I want. And so I gave them like people's names, and
Yeah.
I don't know. But yeah, it's super interesting to see how like people are getting stuff done because there's so many different ways to do things.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Like I said, I was forced to become really technical with the code. For me, I didn't care about coding so much. I didn't care about programming. It was a means to an end. I wanted to create something cool, badass. I wanted to create new features that hadn't been around before. So my coding, when you say your coding sucked, mine was really bad too. I mean, I can't even tell you what my variable names were because I mean I could, but they're like bad words, right? Like I would just come up with random profanities like number one, number two,
That's funny.
and the code was basically unreadable. I didn't even use functions. I would just paste the same code in every time I needed it in that one function for that, for like, let's say it was a command button. Anytime I need to reuse code, I would just paste that code into the command button. And instead of actually, there was no sense of reuse of functionality where you could make a function call. The only function calls I would use are for like APIs and stuff like that. But years later, I trained myself to become a better coder. I learned C++ and that kind of stuff.
Like don't repeat yourself and those kinds of things.
Well, yeah, actual coding guidelines that you're supposed to do. Right.
So when you released AOHell 2 and 3, what was the process of releasing it to get it out there?
Basically, it was spam. Spam didn't really exist back then. So by this point, AOL 2 is like December of 94, January of 95. There really wasn't any spam on AOL. And so basically, I was going to say it's almost like you're phishing people to get you to download your program. But I mean, it's like it's an advertisement. So I would go into AOL chat rooms. I would write up this long email explaining all the features that AOL did. It's going to allow you to kick people offline that you don't like or kick your friends offline. It's going to enable you to scroll. You can do this, you can do that. And, all you have to do is download this program and you're set. So I would write out this email advertising it. I would upload the attachment, AOHell.zip. There was 4 beta versions for AOL 2, 5 beta versions for AOL 3, and each one were like a separate program, even though it was just called beta 1, beta 2. There were so many differences between each beta, so many new features. It should have been like almost a whole new version. I mean, the difference between AOL 2.0 beta 1 and AOL 2.0 beta 5 was almost like, it could have been AOL 5 at that point. And then AOL 3 was the same thing. Each beta was just tons of new features because it was just all happening so fast. So I would attach it into these emails and I would just mass mail it to everybody, to the teen chat room. So basically it was like a phishing campaign when I was trying to phish for people's credit cards and passwords, except I'm targeting new member rooms that still I'm targeting teen chat rooms in order to get people to download the program and ultimately come into the hacker rooms and, join the community. It just blew up. I mean, like I said, AOL was growing at that time. So like when you signed on to AOL in early 94, there was maybe like Teen Chat 1, Teen Chat 2, and it might go up to Teen Chat 7 maybe on like a busy night, like a real busy night. A year later, like summer of 95, I mean, you had Teen Chat 53 or whatever. I mean, like, because every time a room would fill, it would create a new Teen Chat room. And so the growth of AOL was just exponential. I mean, there was just so many more people on all the time. And as that was happening, AOL was being spread. Kids would download it. They were like, oh, shit, this is cool. I like this, this, and this. And they would pass it to their friends. And so it was just basically a campaign. So every new version, I hit the teen chat rooms, mass mail it to everybody. And it wouldn't take long. It would proliferate by itself. I wouldn't even have to do it a couple times. And then I would look back, a couple days later, and I would see everybody had it.
That's great. So then what was AOL's response to the program?
Pretty shitty. They didn't like it. They did some pretty nasty things to try to get rid of it, including having their lawyers lie about it. So as you know, if you read the README file in AOL, there is an anti-pedophile stance that I take for the reason why I wrote AOL. And it was true. It was one of the many reasons I wrote it. That AOL was basically allowing these child abusers to be online while they were targeting the hackers and trying to get rid of the hackers. So you tolerate child abusers, but the actual children who are just having fun, you're going to target them and kick them offline. This double standard enraged me and was one of the main motivations for making AOL. So, AOL continued their shitty actions. So in order to get rid of AOL, they would lie. First of all, they would try to brute force webmasters to take down AOL. So once AOHell got to a certain level of popularity, it started getting known outside of AOL on the general internet. And so people who wanted to get a hold of it and didn't know how to get it on AOL, they would go to a website. So there was some guy who would have his own website. This is 95, right? So this is really early websites. He would have AOHell available to download. And what AOL did and their lawyers is that they would threaten these people on their websites and say, this is a copyright violation, even though it was no copyright violation. They couldn't really even point to any laws that were being broken, but they would threaten with their lawyers to these website operators. And of course, website operators, they can't fight AOL lawyers, so they would take it down. If they would try to fight it, AOL would get really dirty. So at one point, AOL actually started lying and saying that AOHell was a program used by pedophiles in order to spread pedophilia.
Interesting.
And they would say that in their documentation to these webmasters. And this is all documented. If you go in, you remember what Usenet was, news groups back in the day, or alt 20s.
Yeah. I still go on Usenet.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, if you search the archives on Usenet and search for AOHell, you start looking at those old posts from back in '95 and where those webmasters were fighting this, you'll see they copy and paste these legal notices that AOL was sending them, including the lies that they were spreading about it. It's really interesting history there.
I did not know about that. And so, did they ever come after you?
Well, I had my first contact with AOL where they tried to scare me, where I had uploaded, I think, AOL 3.0 beta 5, the last version I had uploaded on a phished account that I had. And usually after I uploaded AOHell, I would never use that account again. I would make a burner account, or I'd get a phish, and I would upload AOHell, pass it out, mass mail it a few times, and then I would never log onto that account again in order to protect myself, because they'd be watching that account. Who knows, try to trace the phone call or whatever. Well, one day I decided, like after I'd uploaded AOHell, one of the last versions of it, I decided to log into this phish again, like a couple of days later. Maybe it was a week later. I don't know why. I knew it wasn't the right thing to do, but I did it anyway. I don't know why. I can't remember why I did it. So I log in and I get this IM. And it's not from TOS Advisor, but it's from some weird official sounding screen name. I haven't done anything. I just signed in and I get this IM of just randomly on this phished account. And he goes, so how's the weather there in Greensboro? And at the time I lived in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm like, fuck. And I'm like, I said, well, it's pretty good, so I hear, but I'm going through 5 diverters, so I wouldn't know.
Nice.
He goes, well, I know you're not telling the truth because your ping's too low. And I'm like, okay, whatever, bro. And then I signed off, and I never went back on there.
What a dick. I mean, seriously.
Yeah, right?
He's just like trying to scare you or something, right?
Yeah, and it worked a little bit. I mean, it did scare me a little bit. And then I thought to myself, well, if they really knew who I was, like he knew what node I was dialing in, right? So I was dialing into the Greensboro node on SprintNet. So that's how he knew my address, and that's what I figured. And I thought, well, if he really knew where I was located, then he would, he would tell me my address or something, or I have cops at my door or something like that, right? So my nervous level really didn't get too high there. I knew I was underage. I knew I was a kid. I knew that I was on the right side of morality, so to speak, even though some aspects of AOHell were kind of abhorrent, like not good, morally speaking. Like I felt I was the good guy. And I felt like anybody who is going to look at me from a criminal perspective, they're going to have to face the facts that AOL is a dirty machine. And, there's just scumbags on here. And I'm just a kid fighting back against the man, and so I don't care. But when I got close to 18, and for various reasons, not just because I was getting close to 18, I quit. I stopped making AOHell. And, that's a whole long story in and of itself. And there's so much to say about all this stuff. But I got into a long distance relationship with a girl and basically fell in love and, had this relationship going on. And, we would joke about, like, we'd hear these clicks on the phone because we'd talk like 3-4 hours a night. We'd hear like little noise on the phone, little clicks. And it was kind of like a running joke that, my phone was being tapped or something like that. But it was a real fear. I mean, it was a real possibility, a real fear that I had. So I think subconsciously, in order to deal with that, I kind of turned away from AOL. I kind of turned away from computers. I kind of changed the entire direction that I had been going in for the last 2 years and going on the internet, creating AOHell, becoming a programmer, I completely changed directions. So I found this girl, kind of fell in love, and then as far as everything else in my life, I changed directions. And I think looking back subconsciously, I was worried of possible consequences, legal consequences that could come, and I was also kind of burned out on it anyway. So I went for about 2 years where I barely even checked email. I mean, I didn't code. I rarely logged on to AOL. There's hacker rooms on IRC that I would occasionally go in and talk to my buddies on there. Old AOL guys that had migrated to IRC and stuff. I would occasionally go in there, but I didn't. I got into cars. I got into drag racing. I blew up my engine. I bought a Mustang. I blew up my engine on that. I learned how to rebuild the motor on it. I became kind of like a redneck. I live in the rural South. The friends that I made were guys that were not on computers. I kind of got a life outside of the house for the first time because I was always kind of like a loner kid. I dropped out of high school at 15, 1 year before you're even legally allowed to. I was very much a loner. And so after AOHell, I kind of got a life outside of computers and really got kind of real friends out, like real life friends for the first time, and that really distracted me from any criminal consequences or me getting into more trouble by the time I turned 18. Had I continued that track of writing programs, and there was a thought I definitely had some ideas about an AOHell version 4, and that would have taken me well past I was 18. And the ideas I had that I actually started implementing for myself were things that actually came about later that people made available later, without me talking to them or whatever. But basically, it was a fear that I lived with for many years. I subconsciously kind of dealt with it by ignoring that part of my life. The friends that I made, they didn't know anything about computers. I would tell them, hey, I'm kind of like this famous computer hacker, and I wrote this program, and da-da-da-da. They're like, oh, yeah, that's cool. And then we'd start talking about cars or girls or something like that. Like, they had no concept. My mom, she didn't have any idea. I got her onto AOL. That's how she found her husband.
Oh, wow.
Her current husband, they've been married for 25 years. I got her on the AOL chat rooms, and that's how she found him. But she has no concept of like hacking, and she doesn't understand any of that stuff, not really curious about it, really had nobody to talk to about it. So I kind of like changed lives. It was almost like a double life. I kind of like changed lives, and that's kind of how I dealt with it,
That's interesting. I think a lot of people like love this. I know I personally did. Like once I got in trouble for like one of my programs, and I got like grounded from the internet for a month. And so I got my driver's license, got a girlfriend, and just kind of didn't never look back.
Yeah. How did you get in trouble with it? Did your parents find out about it somehow?
So I'd created a program, and it could punt people. It could punt off like entire chat rooms, and I
Nice.
posted it. Yeah, I mean, I was pretty proud of it, but it would also like you could send a room. There was like this room invite thing, and so I would interchange sending people the room invite with the special characters to lag them, and then regular IMs, and it would just lag the hell out of people, and then they'd eventually get kicked off. And
that's cool. I like that.
Oh, and sorry, now if I remember, it was called guide punt. It would kick off guides, and so you could like tally off all the guides you punted, and so like you could brag in chat rooms and stuff. And so like
Dude, that's awesome.
I would just like be a dick in a chat room, and then a guide would come in, and then I use my program and kick off the guide, and then like
yeah,
because I thought it was great, but I posted it to like I had a website on our local ISP. And I mean, I knew I probably shouldn't have, but I was just like, it was kind of like, is anybody listening out there? And so I just kind of posted it. And I think I put like my real like ISP's email address just to kind of see what would happen.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, AOL called the ISP and threatened the FBI and stuff.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, my mom worked at the ISP, and she's like, you really embarrassed me at work today, Steven. And I was like, what? And she's like, you're grounded from the internet. It's just like, and I'm like, what about the FBI? She's like, we told them to go away. And I was like, okay. So that was that.
Thanks, Mom. Problem solved, right?
Yeah, it was kind of weird.
Did that kind of end your hacking career then, or did you move on and do things kind of like under the table?
For a while, like I said, I got a driver's license, found a girlfriend, and I'd screw around in AOL every once in a while because I ended up going to a high school. It was like a Microsoft Learning with Laptops program, and there were like 10 high schools in the country that had these Toshiba laptops. Like everyone in the school had a laptop. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought it was great. I'd be like an IRC just in the middle of the day, just like doing whatever.
Yeah,
And
that sounds like what kind of school I'd like.
yeah, or playing Grand Theft Auto. But a lot of kids at AOL, and so I would just like I would kick football players like offline, and they'd be like they would like rage and stuff and be so mad, but they didn't know who kicked them off, and I'd be down the
Right.
hallway chuckling.
That's great. Yeah, it's funny how like much joy we can get out of like trickery like that. I mean, kids are, just mischievous by nature, I think, a lot of times.
Yeah, so I don't know. It was interesting, but yeah, I definitely like I kind of grew up and I was out of it, but the community I think back then that was the really amazing part. The way you could just make lots of friends easily with other kids your age and stuff.
Hmm.
That was really cool to have a sense of community, especially if you didn't have a lot of friends like in real life, So
Right.
that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. That was my door into making friends, and then kind of going outside and making quote unquote real friends. Even though the people that I made friends with on AOL, I consider them, real friends. I ended up meeting a bunch of them in real life and partying with them. Yeah, so there's Dave Soul Crusher, who was my friend. He showed me phishing in the first place, and he may even come up with the word phishing. We're not sure exactly the actual origin, who said it first, whether it was him or me. He one time told me he thinks he called it phishing with an F, and then I took and added the PH and then automated it in my program. I said that's possible because I use both spellings, so we're not really sure. But Dave. There was Dave, all guys I could name, just like I'm sure you had your clique of friends that you could all name, like all the friends that you knew. I had a core group of like 5 or 6 people who, we migrated to IRC. They migrated to IRC first. So they were kind of like the cool kids, right? I stuck around on AOL while they went to IRC. I'm like, IRC is cool, but there's things on AOL I want to do. So when I started writing AOL and doing that stuff, they kind of looked down on it. They were like, ooh, why are you even messing with AOL anymore? We're doing this Unix hacking. And, I just cracked Chris.com and stole their login file with 1,000 accounts. Why are you messing around with Kittyland and AOL? So it was kind of a joke because they would kind of look down on me for, here I was making AOL and, doing all this stuff and creating all this chaos and getting all this fame, And the first friends that I met, they didn't even like that stuff. They were like, they didn't use AOL. They couldn't care anything about that. But those guys, I still talk to them. Well, the core group I haven't talked to in a few years, but we remained friends for years. We'd party down in Florida, and we'd run out a big beach house and just party for for 2-3 days at the beach in Florida, and because we all lived in different parts of the United States, but we would meet up annually and just have fun and party. So make a distinction between your real friends and your online friends. For me, like a lot of my online friends end up becoming my real friends in real life. And those are the guys I was telling you earlier who still call me Cron, hey, it worked.
That's really cool. That's awesome. So, you left, you got into cars and drag racing and stuff, and then the paper you wrote, it's referenced by so many different places on the internet, and it's really interesting. It looks like was that written for a school paper, or what was that?
Well, it's an interesting thing because I wrote it kind of cathartically. I needed to get it out. I had joined college because, of course, I eventually got my GED for the fun of it and decided to take college classes around 2009, 2010. And so I was taking these writing courses. I'd never learned how to write formally. So I was taking these English, and the school that I was going to was considered primarily a writing school. Like they taught you how to write well. Not that I didn't know how, but I always kind of felt like that was something that I missed out on in life, is going to a formal school and learning that. So yeah, I did that later in life. I was in my early 30s, and I had this thing, with me that I live with. And at that time, I really wasn't even sure, like all this phishing stuff, how related it was to the AOHell stuff. I knew that there was a phishing component on AOHell, but I'm like, surely that it really wasn't the origin, right? And the more I looked into it, the more I realized, no, that AOHell was the first place that this started. The general idea of, tricking people goes back to, the beginning of time and beginning of computers, right? But this kind of thing that we see today where you're just mass mailing people this kind of way, it really didn't exist before AOHell. And of course, that's where the name started. And after I realized that, it really started freaking me out. I'm like, wow, like how the F is this possible? So, it's a really long story, and it's hard to explain, and especially all the feelings that I was feeling during those years, for those 15 years, and trying to find my place in the world and understand, what this whole thing is all about, life and, just you kind of get philosophical on you. So to make a long story short about why I wrote the paper, but at that time, it had been 15, 16 years since I wrote AOHell. I was learning about the phishing stuff, and I really needed to like come out. Like I really needed to just let it out. Like who did this? Who am I? Why I did this? What happened? Who's responsible? And if you notice, I mean, I didn't create Twitter accounts or like social media. I wasn't trying to get fame for it. I didn't, do interviews with people trying to get my name out there. I wasn't interested in any of that. I didn't care. I don't care about any of that. I'm not a materialistic person, but I wrote it solely to get it out of my heart, to just let it out, to just, because it was kind of like this dark thing that was living inside of me that I could never talk about. I mean, for years, I couldn't tell people who I really was. I mean, I could joke about it with a friend who had no idea what AOL was, but I couldn't seriously risk my freedom by like applying to a job and saying, hey, I wrote this famous hacker program. You should hire me, and pay me lots of money, because I couldn't do that. And I didn't want to work for the man anyway, but that's just beside the point. But so there was this thing building up inside of me, and writing that paper was basically letting it out, kind of just like saying, okay, this is who I am. This is what I did. For whatever comes of it, I didn't try to publish it in a journal,
Yeah, but so it definitely got referenced though. It's really weird if you look at how many different places, like a lot of sites reference it. Did people contacting you after you wrote it?
Yeah. So a weird thing happened is that MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, they have this magazine called the MIT Review, and they had, I think they still runs, but every week or every month they review all the new papers, the preprint papers that get put up on archive. And they kind of like look through them and see what the best ones are. And then on their blog, they post which ones they think are the best new preprint papers. And I didn't even realize that they had read my paper and they had put it up on their blog as one of the best papers released that week or that month. I can't remember what it was. I think it was that week. So along with like 10 other papers. So it was listed as one of the best. Now, well, I didn't know about it until I got contacted by a journalist for, I think it was Gawker. And he said, hey, I noticed that your paper was referenced on MIT. Would you like to talk about it? Da, 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 da. I'm like, whoa. So I looked at the website and I noticed that. So, I mean, the reason why I think it's referenced now, actually, I'm surprised it's not referenced kind of more, because it kind of like is like it explains the origins of where the word came from, at least, if not, the birthing of the whole phenomenon itself. But I think that's why, is that, well, MIT brought it some exposure, and then just the fact that if you want to know, I mean, it's the truth. It's where the term came from. It's where phishing came from, and I think enough people read it and could see for themselves. Okay, this guy's telling the truth. This is legit. Like, the screenshots. You could, if you wanted to verify the screenshots, you could go and find old versions of AOHell, and you could search the executable for the word phishing. So you could, I don't know if you can anymore, but you used to be able to Google AOHell.zip and download one of the archived copies that exist. And I think there still might be repositories that still hold it. I don't know. I haven't checked in a while. But you could download AOHell, install it, at least on a Windows 95 computer. I don't know about Windows XP. But, you can install it or extract it and search the executable and see for yourself that the word phishing is inside the executable. Right? It's not mangled.
Right.
Like it's in plain text. So, I mean, it's the truth. So if people want to know, I think enough people who are interested in phishing and who want to understand the origins of it, I mean, they think that they just recognize that that's the real deal. And I think that's why it gets referenced. And for me, there was like a struggle between feeling shame, feeling like, everybody wants to have a positive impact on the world and wants to be remembered for something positive. And I thought I had done that when I was a kid. When I got fame and stuff for AOHell, I thought, yeah, this is my mark on the world. This is badass. This shows that I'm a badass, and I just, and F these people, F AOL, F the man, F the government. I helped all these kids out, got them free AOL, helped create this community, and I felt really proud of myself. I didn't have an ego about it. I didn't, but I felt like I made my mark on the world, and I got the fame from it. So, I mean, I remember traveling to California and meeting people I'd never seen before, and they knew who I was. They just knew who I was. They didn't believe me. They're like, well, what are you doing here? Da, 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 da. And of course, but I lived a double life where I couldn't really come out with who I was. And so it was kind of like this kind of like double life. Well, as I got older and became more mature, my ideas of the world expanded, and my ideas of morality and what's right and wrong, and they've become more sophisticated. I haven't changed at my core, but my ideas are different now. And if I were to do something really cool again, it would be in the same kind of spirit, but it wouldn't be, where innocent people are going to be caught up in it. You know what I mean? And so when I came out with the phishing paper, I had to come to terms with that. I had to come to terms with the fact that this, even though I didn't create phishing, as like, phishing would still exist if I wasn't around, right? They would call it something differently. The general form would still be around, even though. So I had a part to play, but my ideas of my old ideas of like, oh man, I was part of history. I did something good. I really struggled with that because that was taken away as I became older, and I realized that there's all this bad stuff that comes with it. The innocent people got hurt by it. Lots and lots of innocent people got hurt by it, not just on AOL, but just throughout the years. That I played a part in all that. So that's something that I struggle with. So getting that paper out, like I said, it was cathartic. And at that moment, I was still struggling with that transition into, yeah, I'm proud of what I did, and to coming to a more sophisticated, I guess, understanding of it, or a more mature understanding of it, where I see, okay, all the damage that it caused. It's not something I would do again in that way. I have compassion for the people that are hurt by this. And like that ego stuff that I got from it, like the fame and like the being proud of doing something cool, like that doesn't really matter. Like I know what my capabilities are. I know I'm a decent person, and that's all that really matters for that. Yeah, it's a long story. I could talk forever about what my life was like and the transition and worrying about the police and then finally, dealing with the phishing stuff, and kind of like what it was like to read your name in magazines, like getting the fame, all that stuff. I could talk for hours about that stuff, and it's been an interesting experience for me. But I think I'd like to hear more from other people though that were in that community, because I left in late '95, and really that was almost the beginning of it for most people. That community grew so much from '95 all the way into the end of the '90s. I mean, I don't think people really understand. At least I don't think I even understand the extent to which that grew into such a huge community. The hacker community, the wares community on AOL, how many people were involved. I mean, just by the sheer number of programs. I mean, probably hundreds of programs, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, definitely. It's incredible how much it grew, and then all the different whereas groups, like the free whereas movement. And then I think a lot of people did migrate to IRC eventually, but I think it inspired a lot of people to want to learn how to create their own program. And some of them, ended up making a career of that, right? They either get into information security or getting into like being a developer and that kind of thing. And I think that being able to inspire people, I think that's certainly one of the, if you think about like some of the positive things I think that came out of AOL, I think that you had inspired a generation of teenagers to want to create their own programs, right? And there was thousands of them, and so I think that was really cool.
Yeah, maybe I'm underestimating. I was going to say a couple hundred programs, but yeah, it's got to be more than that. Probably like in the thousands. You think of programs?
Definitely. You can look online, and there's certain websites. I think like it's like LensHell or something. There's a number of them. You can just go there and see them.
Yeah,
they're all out there. I don't know, but there's a lot of like it's just simple ones and stuff. Some people that they still don't program today, but they had a really good time back then, just making programs. I don't know.
yeah. And if you think, okay, well, those are the people making programs, and most people who were involved in that community weren't programmers. They were people just, trading software or hanging out with their friends. I mean, like the programmers were kind of like a subset of the whole community, right? Not everybody made their own program, although it sometimes seemed like that. Like there were a lot of people that didn't make their own programs. So if you try to figure out, okay, if there were thousands of programs, then when you try to figure out the total population of everybody, including the people that were just using the programs and not actually writing them, you might be talking about tens of thousands of people at that point. Who knows? I mean, people, even people like Mark Zuckerberg, he came from that community. He was a hacker who wrote his own AOHell type program. Nobody knew about it, and the evidence came out for that like in 2011.
A fader or something.
Yeah, the Vader Fader, I think it was called.
Fader. That's funny.
And then Steve Case, he did a Ask Me Anything on Reddit. You know how they do those threads.
Yeah.
And somebody made a funny comment to Steve Case saying, "Hey, would you forgive me if I told you I used AOHell back in the day?" And he responded, and he said, "It's funny you say that because Mark Zuckerberg, when I met him, he told me he was a hacker on AOL, and that's how he got his start and da da da." So Steve Case kind of added to that. I'm not even like the most famous person to come from that. Like I'm nobody, right? Like this guy's a 200 billionaire, creator of Facebook, and he started from that same community. And I'm not proud of that, though. If I had anything to do with that, Facebook's not something that I like too much. But I am on there with my family. I log in maybe like once every couple of weeks just to keep tabs on things. But no, you're right, though. I mean, I think that is a positive thing, like that whole community and people who learn how to program. Yeah, and just the community. I mean, just being able to make friends and having a common interest and being able to share and everything that a community involves. That was a positive aspect because I mean those kids. I mean, just like you. I mean, I can tell you like they're not criminals. I mean, yeah. You might have used a credit card online, to bill some stuff to get free access or so. But I mean, like, you weren't really stealing. I mean, pirating software, like that's, you're just trading software. You're talking to your friends. You're making cool stuff. You're getting AOL for free, which should be free anyway, $20 a month. So, like, I see that aspect of it for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything else you want to share about during that time?
Yeah, just lots of stuff. I could talk for hours and hours about this. So maybe we'll do another one of these or something. But I'm glad you brought up that positivity part. Like and then your story about learning the program and that kind of stuff. I mean, we all just kind of learned from each other, and there really was a positive aspect to that stuff, and that does make me feel good to think about.
Yeah, definitely. The collaboration, I think, was really key during that time to be able to work with others and figure things out is always pretty exciting. That kind of community doesn't, at least I haven't found it these days. It was a different time back then. Nowadays, you probably would not go into a chat room. If you did, it would probably just be a bunch of jerks, right? I don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, there's some certain I think Discord's kind of like one of the newer things, and there are some communities for specific niches and stuff that I think that people will collaborate on, but other places it's just like the regular terrible internet,
Right. Yeah, and everything's privatized now. So Discord, everything. Those are kind of like private servers, right? It's not like IRC where you have like a public network. It's kind of like they can ban you if they don't like what you're saying, that kind of stuff. Yeah, the internet just in general has changed. So you say that the community back then was more open and exciting. And I think in general, the whole internet was kind of like back then felt like you're on the edge of something really cool, and the vibe was different for sure. And plus, we were kids, so when you're a kid, you're open to everything and you're ready to start something new. It's different when you're older.
Yeah, that's certainly true. What's really interesting, I was looking into some of the stuff like the FBI was doing back then, and they actually were doing some stuff about the pedos, and there is some prosecution that occurred and stuff. But and they had actually had a program that ran on AOL's network that would sniff all traffic.
Oh wow!
But they were only permitted to look for specific kinds of packets. So if they had like an order on someone's screen name, then they could pull the chat logs. But otherwise, they weren't allowed to review the logs, and AOL had a policy where they wouldn't look at them. It's kind of interesting. I mean, they were doing some stuff when I think maybe when you and I look back at it, it looks like they were doing nothing. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But there was some action that was taken. But I certainly agree that it should have been a whole lot more. But it's like, AOL doesn't really have the incentive, right? It's like they're trying to make money. And it's like, oh, are we going to waste time, looking for these pedos? Or are we going to stop the hackers who are, taking away from our bottom line? They're like, oh,
right.
Of course, bottom line, not pedos, right? It's like, oh, my God, this is what's wrong with corporate America.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with that. I didn't know that about the feds. For me, it was the fact that they would just close down the hacker room. And, we hadn't changed the private rooms yet. So all we had were the hacker public rooms at that time. And so when they came and closed one down, it sucked because we'd all have to scurry back into a new room. We'd have to create a new room and get right back into that. And it was kind of restarted everything for us, because they would do it twice a day. And so Yeah, and then and you'd go and you'd see that these kind of predatory child molesting rooms were still open after they closed your room down, and it's like, okay, what the hell's going on here? But I have good memories of AOL in a lot of respects, and made a lot of friends there. There's a lot of fond memories from that time, and it's just amazing to me just to hear other people's stories and just how big it got. It really is. Because I mean, I have my little group of friends. I'm not more special than anybody else in that sense. Like, I mean, I have my story that goes with it, but there's so many stories that people can tell about how they got into programming, about what their groups of friends were. Like when you start talking about like the features that you made about the mass punter, like I never even heard of that before. I mean, that's so cool. And there's so many stories like that of, where people can talk about their experiences. And that's why I'm glad you're doing this podcast. I mean, I think it's cool.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. I think that this will hopefully be the most popular episode. I don't know if you checked out the AOL. There's like a Facebook group in AOL. It's called like AOL Proggies. Or sorry, not AOL. It's on Facebook. It's called AOL Proggies. I think I sent you the link, but you should check it out. There's a lot of people from that time are on there.
Actually, I did hear about that before, and kind of like keep on a low profile. So like, it's like one of these things where I want to participate, but yet I feel weird and kind of shy in a certain weird sense. So, but I'll check it out and maybe start up a conversation with some people.
Yeah, right on. I think that you're certainly a legend to a lot of people from that time, especially in that group. So yeah, I'll send you the link again. Certainly check it out. What are you up to these days?
For most of the last 10 years, I work as a contractor at home. It's not really technical work, but I work with search engines, and I've done it part-time for most of the last 10 years, just contracting out. And, it pays my bills. I'm somebody who's really interested in kind of having free time and doing what I like to do outside of work. And so I live pretty inexpensively. I live in the rural South, where it's really cheap to live. So I really don't have to work that much, in order to pay the bills. I really spent like a whole lot of time after AOL in kind of just self-education, just reading. I mean, I used to read 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, books, magazines, newspapers. I really spent a substantial amount of my life in self-education. Kind of like a hermit, just kind of like, just self-studying in a little monk hut, kind of just learn about the world. And, so I'm in my 40s now. I'm 43. I'm going to be 44 next year. And they say 40 is the new 25. So.
Yeah, totally. All right, I don't want to keep you too long. We've chatted for quite a while. Thanks a ton for coming on today and sharing your story. I think a lot of people really wanted to know the kind of story behind AOHell. So thank you.
Yeah, well, I hope people were curious about it. If anybody wants more information, my email address is out there. Feel free to post it on the link. I'm always happy to answer questions. I'm not always very responsive on emails right away. But, I try to check my main email every once in a while, and I'll be more than happy to talk with anybody. And, thank you for this opportunity. I've never really done an interview like this and explained things, and it's something I've wanted to do, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Initiating shutdown sequence.
A friend of mine told me, try America Online. I said, why?